Hey guys, it's Jake here. Welcome back to Canadian Cutting Edge. This is a follow-up video for the Victorinox VENTURE. When I made this video, like always, I don't watch other reviewers' takes on knives before I do my own reviews. I want to give you a brand new view of a knife. So, I didn't know about the, I don't know if I'd call it controversy or, the opinions of other reviewers of these knives because, I wasn't exposed to that. I just gave you what I experienced. And I did talk briefly about, how I tested the knife. And in my testing, it survived. Now, I got a few notes here, so I got to make sure I stay on track so it doesn't go too long. Also, I haven't made very many videos this summer. It's a slower summer. I've got so much other stuff I have to do and other things going on in my life, and taking care of yard duties and stuff too, and whatever. I'm not going to talk about that. But this knife, a complaint that came up in my comments, and that's when I went and watched some other videos about this, is that the edge of the blade, well, my take on it is it's too thin for the tasks that people were using them for. And so people had warping of the edge. I think I saw some comments about chipping. I don't remember, but that the blade didn't stand up for what they tested it for. Now, it seems to me that the defects that people mentioned that this knife has, there's two reasons for those happening. One of the reasons, and I hope this doesn't sound like me blaming them, but one of the reasons is that people like to use their knives in extreme ways. Some people might call them abusive ways, but they like to use their knife in extreme ways. Doing harder tasks than the knife was designed for. Now, it's not wrong especially for reviewers, to test knives to their limits. There's some reviewers that will, they break knives on purpose to see where the breaking point of the knife is. And a lot of people call that abusive testing, or, to the point of break testing, whatever they call it. The thing is, some normal everyday users of knives use knives in extreme ways as well. So I'm not blaming those users. I'm just saying that does exist, and that could be some of the issues that have been found with the knife have been found because the knife was used in ways beyond what the knife was capable of. Is that good or bad on the user? I'm not going to comment on that because, it could be, it might not be. That's the way it is. Now, the second reason is, and this time it is Victorinox's fault, in my opinion. They have packaged, put on the associated things, especially in the Pro version, and in their marketing and everything, they've declared this knife basically to be a survivalist / bushcraft type knife. Not sure if they explicitly use those terms, but in their advertising, in their packaging, in the pictures, all the stuff that goes along with this knife from the Victorinox company suggests that this knife is a bushcrafting and survivalist knife, at least implicitly, and I believe explicitly as well. This knife is not capable of what most, let's call them, no, I don't know what to call them. What I suspect most people who are into, survivalist endeavors and in bushcraft endeavors would expect a knife to be capable of. It's not capable of all those things. And so I blame people using knives in more extreme ways than the knife is designed for. And secondly, I blame Victorinox because they are basically claiming this knife should be able to do a whole lot more than it can do. At least they are claiming that implicitly in their marketing and packaging. Now, does that make this Victorinox VENTURE a bad knife? That's the second question. Now, in my review, I came out fairly positive about this knife, quite positive about this knife. In my testing, the way Canadian Cutting Edge is set up, I review knives, but I use them, some people will say more conservatively than others, but I grew up in an immigrant family in, fairly deep poverty. And so I was raised that you have a tool of whatever kind, you don't abuse it. You use it carefully so that you can use it for as many years as possible. And that's, sort of bred into me. And that's how I do my testing. Now, I did do some batoning with this, but I was batoning, some kindling off of spruce. It may have been pine, I think spruce. And I didn't go through any knots. And so I was taking, little slivers of wood off of another, piece of wood. I wasn't batoning, trying to go through, a 5-inch log all the way through in one shot to cut it in half. No, I was taking stuff off the edge, and it performed quite well for that task. Now, why did I do that? Well, unlike a lot of reviewers, apparently unlike a lot of reviewers, I do all the measurements of this knife, every knife, before I start testing it. I knew before this knife touched any material of any kind that this edge is pretty thin. Like it's a thin edged knife. A little bit thicker at the tip, but even there it's not super thick. And I knew just from understanding the geometry of a knife that this thing's not going to go through a piece of oak. It's not going to. That's a more extreme example. I just knew it was more delicate than other knives, fixed blade knives are. I knew it's not a Scandi grind, so it doesn't have a lot of strength and durability directly behind that apex. And so I had to be more judicious, more gentle, if you will, with the knife than I would otherwise be if it was thicker behind the edge. And so that's how I treated the knife. And it came through and did those tasks really well, and did other tasks extremely well because of how sharp it is and how thin it is behind the edge with this nice full ground blade. So if you're going to use the knife for things that it's designed for, it's going to excel. Now, if you're going to use the knife, I'm not saying what it should have been designed for. That's a different subject. What it actually, the design features, the geometry of this knife, if you use it for what this geometry can handle, it'll do well. But Victorinox basically told us it should do a whole lot more. Now, that's my fault for not covering that in the video. Certainly not as well as I should, but barely probably in that video. I should have mentioned that this knife is more delicate than it claims to be. Does that make this knife a bad knife? Well, yes and no. Yes, this is not in the top choices for a bushcraft knife. It's not in the top choices for a survival knife, regardless of how Victorinox has packaged it and promoted it and bundled it with some other things. I don't recommend this knife for batoning. I don't recommend any knife for batoning, actually. If you want to baton, get a fro. Now, there are some knives, I've reviewed a fro or two, at least one, where the knife manufacturer explicitly said this is a fro, or at least I've had knives like that. And a fro is a knife that's designed to go through wood by being whacked on the back, batoning. Now, you got fros. Classical fros are, where there's a piece of wood and then there's a blade sticking out, and this is the handle, and you whack on it. But fros can also have a knife shape where it's got a handle and the blade sticking out, straight along the handle. Either way, you can have fros, and they're designed with edges similar to a hatchet edge. Sort of like a saber grind, but not a full flat edge, and it's somewhat thick at the apex, and the sharpening grind is, I don't know, 30 degrees per side, at least 25 degrees per side, so that it can handle it, so the geometry can handle going through a piece of wood. So yes, this is not a good knife for bushcraft. It is not a good knife for all of the survival tasks. It's good for some survival tasks, but certainly not all the basic survival tasks. But no, it's not a bad knife if you use it for what this edge was designed for. Now, I'm not saying what Victorinox claims it was designed for. I'm saying what this actual design, this type of full flat grind, how thick it is and how thin it is behind the edge, and the steel type, the way this was designed and made can be a really good knife. And that's how I used it. And it can do some great tasks. If somebody was using this for a skinning knife, it can do that quite well, very well, I guess. I'm not, I've done a little bit of stuff like that, but I'm not an avid hunter or anything. So I can't say that I've done those tasks with it, but I understand the knife and I know, what it's capable of by understanding its geometry and, all the other things about it, the steel and everything. So yeah, is it a good knife? Is it a bad knife? Well, it all depends on what perspective you're taking. Both can be true. Now, I suggest, and this is my summarizing of this thing, I suggest more reviewers need to test a knife based on what the knife is and not necessarily on what you want it to be or what it claims to be. Knife manufacturers can make mistakes in what they claim about a knife or what they advertise a knife as. Now, those can be intentional mistakes or those can be unintentional mistakes. And I'm not going to try to say which is which in this case, although I would lean towards the intentional. I think at least they should have known that this knife is not a good bushcraft knife. They should have known that this is not a very good survival knife. It's an okay survival knife, but it's not a very good survival knife. So reviewers need to take measurements of their own knives. Don't just trust what it says on a website. If you're a knife buyer, don't just trust what it says on the manufacturer's website. That's why I do a full comprehensive set of measurements in my videos. And those measurements are measurements I've taken myself. I use my vernier calipers. I use a ruler too, but I take precision measurements. And you also need to learn about steel, like how good is 14C28N, which happens to be a very good lower cost steel, a well-rounded steel in terms of its edge retention and corrosion resistance, quite good. Its durability, toughness, corrosion, I already said corrosion resistance, all those things, 14C28N was a good choice for this knife, but for the uses that they wanted, it should have a thicker edge right behind that sharpened grind, that apex grind. Now, this is not to suggest that we don't hold companies like Victorinox accountable. We need to be telling them that they messed up. That this is not the knife they claim it to be. It's an okay knife. It can you can use it for a lot of things. It can work very well for you. But let's not pretend that this is a bushcraft knife. And I take my own responsibility for that. I should have done more of what I'm doing in this video, in that video, because I already did have, the idea that this was thin behind the edge, which is why I was, some people might say, delicate with my batoning. I know I didn't show the batoning. I don't show my testing because testing is so subjective. It's not anywhere near as objective as people claim that it is and want others to think that it is. It's extremely subjective when you are testing a knife. And so I don't show my testing because the skill of the user, the actual materials and how they are held and all kinds of things come into play. And I'm not going to get any more into that right now. But yeah, I should have been more, I should have expressed more about how thin this edge is in terms of its limitations. I talked about how thin that edge is in terms of its benefits, but I didn't talk enough about its limitations, and that's on me. And hopefully this video, can address that and remedy that. So hopefully you've watched this. I will be putting out more videos this summer, but not super frequently. I thank you so very much for watching. By the way, head over to the Big Knucker. He's doing a giveaway. His channel has grown to 2,000 subscribers. I'll leave a link for him down below. So if you don't know about him, go ahead and give him a subscribe. Give his videos a watch. He likes to review more higher end knives than I tend to review overall. And I'm sort of growing more into doing more fixed blades in my channel. He doesn't do an awful lot of that. But he's a great guy, a fellow Albertan, Canadian knife YouTuber guy. So check him out. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Those things do make a big difference. And remember, friends, always cut towards your chum, not your thumb. Bye for now.